you go. I'd like to call the December City Commission meeting for Pleasant Ridge to order.
Or November 30th.
Or November 30th, sorry, it's a special meeting. Could we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Budnick? Commissioner Lenko?
Here.
Commissioner Perry?
Here.
Commissioner Schmier?
Here.
Mayor Scott?
Here. And Commissioner Budnick should be joining us in a few minutes. He had an obligation he had to complete. Why don't we move on to public discussions for items that are not on the agenda? Are there any topics to discuss tonight? Seeing none, we'll move straight on to the motion that is on the table, has been tabled. And what we would typically do is remove the item from the table. And that was the motion that was made in the last meeting to form a committee for the Community Advisory Committee. May I have a motion?
I'll make the motion to untable the motion from last meeting regarding the CAC.
Okay, is there a second for that motion? All right, in the absence of a second, the motion is completed.
Fails.
Yes, and we'll move on to the discussion of creating either another motion or some other action around the committee. So we'll begin the discussion around the Citizens Advisory Committee and see what we'd like to do for it. The city manager was kind enough to provide us with a list of things that we might want to go through, and the discussion is pretty much open for us to have around that. Would anybody like to start?
Well, I started, I feel, by bringing the previous motion. So if we're not going to unpack that, I don't know what else to contribute. Like, are we going to move forward with the CAC? Will somebody else
Well,
make a recommendation for the CAC?
What I'll do is
was
just provide
specifically
everyone-
wrong with the way that I presented it.
Sure. What I'll do is provide everyone with just a bit of background. The election occurred. We had a motion that was put on the table during the November meeting 2 weeks ago that was not passed here now, and so we're going to craft another motion of some kind to describe the committee that will help define the terms of the way that we take care of our water infrastructure funding. Our goal would be to have this committee come up with a recommendation probably around the end of March, so that by the April timeframe, their recommendation could go into our budgeting for the next budget year. We would typically get that going in April and have it voted on by June, so that on July 1st it's enacted. And that's what we do. We had several opinions on what the advisory committee should be shaped like, and how many people could be on the committee, and we'll hopefully work through some of those today.
Sure.
So that's where we're at now.
I know when I was taking notes and when I was thinking it through, I was using the format that was provided to us. So I would ask if we could just kind of go through this exact format and talk about it kind of point by point this way, if that works for other people. But certainly that was the way I thought about it. And
And I suspect what will happen is we'll have a discussion. A motion will be made. There's Chris. And that will give everyone in the that are attending an opportunity to respond to those comments that are made during the discussion. And Mr. Bruckman, would you like to say a few words? Are you good?
No, the information that was provided to you, the kind of thought starters or questions you need to answer towards forming it are just summarized on the screen there. I think it's pretty straightforward. So,
So,
in your court.
Mr. Merritt, may I ask, what needs to be then included in the motion? Like, is the entire scope, timeline, selection process, application, communication methods, and facilitation going to be encapsulated in the motion? Or is the motion simply going to be the city commission is creating the initiative to form the CAC, which will then be determined
Right.
from, working with the facilitator and building out the consensus of the group?
I think we have a couple of things that we'd want to get done today. That would be at least agree that we're going to have a facilitator.
Well, I may interrupt, only because we don't need a facilitator if we're not going to do the CAC.
Exactly. So
So-
I think if we say that we're going to do a CAC, then we would want to know that whether there's a facilitator so that work can happen. We might not necessarily need to pick the number of people because we don't know the number of applicants we're going to receive.
Certainly.
And then it's up to us to decide if there are other things that we'd like to include that maybe haven't been on the table before, because we've had a couple of weeks to think about it.
Great.
So in my view, it's an open discussion. We can decide where we want to head with it and then make a motion that people could comment on and decide where we land this evening. We always have the option to continue the discussion in the next workshop or in the next meeting if we want, but I'd just be mindful of the fact that we want to complete this by the end of March, so we wouldn't want it to go on for that long.
And just a procedural point, there's not public discussion in 6.6, so are we going to amend that and make like 6A?
I think if we make a motion, then there would be the opportunity for people to comment on the motion.
Okay.
I think that would be the process.
Yeah.
Is that?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah? Sorry.
Ralph Costelli, 27 Elm Park.
Yes?
I am very surprised that the motion to take it off the table failed for lack of a second, especially since I remember Commissioner Lenko being pushed to put it on the table. Perhaps now that Commissioner Budnick is here, he should be offered the opportunity to second the motion to take the other motion off the table, and then we can hear how you folks feel about it. What I'm hearing now is what we're going to do, and I don't know how you know what you're going to do because there's been no motion passed saying what you're going to do. Thank you.
If I may, I think the way I would respond is, with it off the table, it gives the option for it to be revised or added or not accepted at all. So we'll find out shortly.
Taking it off the table finally gives it the ability to be discussed as it was moved.
I think because the same topic will be discussed, it will be discussed. The outcome is
Commissioner
unknown, as you
Budnick,
said.
would you have seconded a motion to take the other motion off the table? The motion made by.
I would say that that's a question we can't answer because we moved past the point.
Okay, we see how it is.
Yes. All right. We'd like to have a discussion.
Yeah, I would love to.
All right. Do we want to go through each of the items just point by point, or how would we like to do it?
Yes.
All right. So number of members. Is that something we think we want to decide tonight, or my view would be, sorry?
Can we go from this one? I'm sorry. Is that okay?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
I have it here.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. It's the same information, just in a different order. Thank you.
So, included in the meeting agenda were a list of items in a different order. So it's these items in a different order. Is it okay if we just go through? So timeline. I think as I described earlier, it makes sense to me that we'd kind of want to get it started as soon as possible, wrap it up by the end of March. Does that make sense?
The way if I can start, and I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, but here was my thought. My thought, I kind of put it in time frames, but my thought was to have applications sent out by the week of December 13th through 17th. I did a Monday through Friday. Applications back by the 31st, which gives people 2 weeks to complete the applications. And then from our side, it would give us 2 weeks to the week of our January 14th to do our full reviews, our interviews, if we decide to do that, which would put our CAC put together by January 14th, and having the first meeting that first week between the 17th and the 21st. So to get it put together and get it started right away. Those were the dates that I was putting together. And from there, I put some other dates in there, but that was what I was thinking in terms of formation, in terms
Sure.
of a date range.
And that leads us to the question, to be done by the 14th, that means we would have to decide whether we're interviewing or not interviewing in order to fit it all in time.
Well, if we have 2 weeks, my thought is if during that 2-week period we have 2 meetings, and it kind of takes us down to a different point in my notes, but a lot of it obviously depends on how many applications we get back.
Sure.
But from there, I was thinking, once we decide how we're going to vote, we narrow that down to, say, 20. At that point, we interview, we reconvene, and narrow down to from that larger group to our final number, whatever that is. So yeah, certainly a tight time frame, giving kind of 2-week increments. was
And
my
I
thought.
missed your date on when you suggested we'd have the application out.
Week of the 13th through the 17th. Applications back by the 31st, and having us decide by the 14th.
If I could,
Sure.
there's no reason we couldn't have applications out sooner than the 13th to the 17th.
Okay.
If there was, I don't know what the consideration was, in your mind for that being the date, but putting together the application, getting it out is not a time-intensive task.
I respectfully, well, we need to talk about what's on the application, what's allowable, and
Absolutely.
Sure.
yeah, and to give people adequate time. It's the holidays and folks are traveling, and I know there are people who are interested in participating, would need to weigh what's going on in their lives.
But to what Jim says, the earlier we get it out, the longer we actually give people to complete it. So if we can get it out before the 13th, I
Well,
think
and
that's...
I'm going to keep bringing us back to, are we doing this or not? Like, we're talking about the minutia right now, but are we going to do a CAC? So is the timeline the impediment to actually agreeing on this?
No, I suppose we could wind back and ask the question.
Yeah, are
do
we going
want
to do this?
Yeah.
And
Is
if
this
we're
why
going to
we
do
set up
this,
this meeting?
Yeah,
totally. Yes, it is.
So,
To-
Well, and part of it is we didn't agree on my motion, like it wasn't, so at this point, there's disagreement. The 4 of you are saying, we don't want to do a CAC until somebody says, let's do a CAC.
I can put out a motion, and again, learning the details. I want to do a CAC. What I was not okay with was the specific language in the motion.
Specifically,
I don't think that, getting into it further, I'd like there to be more
yes, we need to
details,
talk about the details.
which is what we're doing, but
That's what I'm asking. What
Specifically-
specifically was wrong
let's
with? yeah.
take a step back then. We've made the assumption that, actually, my assumption from the last meeting is that there was general desire to do a committee. However, the details were not necessarily agreed to. Is that still the feeling of today, so that we could move forward with the details
yes,
and plan the details around the committee?
yes.
Then
My
I
hope is
think-
that we put a motion, once we review all of these details, we then present a motion that we can then gain consensus on.
We need to adopt the motion before we go. Like, to me, the timeline and the application are very important, but agreeing that we're going to do this is more important.
And I think we can do both
Deadlines
simultaneously.
Okay.
Because that's essentially what your motion did 2 weeks ago, was to apply details to the notion that we would have a committee. I think what we're trying to do is to scope out the details that
So-
we're comfortable with. And we may still not all vote the same way, but at least we're comfortable with the general framework.
So respectfully, I think 7 is the most important, the scope of what this thing is going to do.
Certainly, but let's move through
like,
it before we jump to the scope.
Timeline.
Here,
Are we doing this thing now?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If I can I would like to work through all of it, including the scope, which is important, to have a full framework of what this is going to look like.
Respectfully, is the timeline immovable? If we agree to this timeline, and then something else changes down to 0.5 or 6 or 8, like, does the whole thing go away?
Why would the scope affect the timeline?
I'm saying let's order the priorities. let's order the priorities and talk about, are we doing the Citizens Advisory Committee? And then flesh in the details, like a skeleton and building muscle upon the skeleton.
I think what everyone has said to this point is that they're interested in doing the committee. And now we're working through the details. And I think your point is the scope the most important thing or the seventh most important thing?
No. Sorry, and I would feel a lot more comfortable if we agreed to a motion that we are going to form a CAC, have a skeleton, and then fill in the muscle around it.
I think.
Like, I'm operating in good faith, but I don't want to spend a lot of energy talking about this if it's going to get thrown out in an hour, right?
Well, thankfully, we're in a public setting, and I think we'll work through the details. And what I've heard
Okay.
from everyone, all five of us, is that there's interest in having a committee. So now it's just working out the details. And I am not committed to any order in particular. If there's something that somebody wants to start on first, it isn't. I just want to get through it so that by the end of March, we have a good understanding of where we are and what the voice of the committee is.
In regards to timing, may I ask Jim a question, or everyone a question, which is, from past years, the budget introduction is presented in the May meeting. At what point do you and the city need the recommendations in order to have it ready for the May meeting?
So the timeline is usually that the first draft is being developed during March,
Okay.
and then that's transmitted to the commission early April. And then budget workshops occur with the city commission through April.
Mm-hmm.
And then it is introduced for public hearing at the May meeting.
Okay. If we have the recommendation by the end of March, does that work?
Absolutely.
What about April 15th? Does that work?
Yeah, it can work with it. The only, we would just be putting together a budget with contingencies
Okay.
pending the recommendation and the city commission's action on that recommendation. So, the only thing you really run into is the later the recommendation comes, it could feel a little rushed in terms of taking that recommendation and incorporating it into the budget.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the only risk. The latest, if we had a recommendation at the end of May, we could still make it work, but it would be a little challenging.
Okay.
So yes, from fully vetting it and having it in all of the budget presentation documents that the commission receives and everyone reviews, end of March would be optimal.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And if we chose the candidates on the 14th, I think that gives us almost 10 weeks to get to the end of March, so including some holiday and things in there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I
great.
just wanted to understand, kind of our drop dead dates.
Sure. Okay. Is there anything else on the timing?
The only
anyone?
other notes I had was, making sure that when we had a recommendation, sorry, Ann, if I cut you off, to make sure that we also build in their time to have another special commission meeting if we decide to do that, so that they're publicly presented.
Sure.
Beyond, obviously, the kind of weekly or meetingly updates to the residents, but also making sure we're having a special meeting to do that, and whether that be at the end of April, mid-April, whenever that is.
Was there any concern about having the applications back by December 31st from anyone? I think that works for me. It is the holiday season, and it is going to be, we just have to have people think about it, really think about it, and get their applications in the next 4 weeks, and that would seem to be ample time.
And if we can push it out earlier, better. I mean, the sooner we
Sure.
can get it out.
So, and what happens if it doesn't? Does the CAC fail and this thing fold?
What doesn't?
If we incorporate this language into the actual motion, like, I think that is an excruciating level of specificity to include in a motion. It's good to be aligned on it, but I think there first needs to be a motion that we're talking about.
We might
Can-
not include it in the motion, if I may. We might not include it in the motion, but at least we'll have an understanding, a guidance of what we're working on. we can work on that language after we've worked through the details.
Okay.
But in a sense, I agree. I wouldn't want the motion to be so filled with detail that something could make it fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Size. My opinion is wait on the size until we see the applicants.
Yes. And my point too is the voters, not politicians group, the anti-gerrymandering group that serves nearly 10 million Michiganders is comprised of 13 people. So they serve nearly 10 million people at 13-person board, divided or broken up between Republicans, Democrats, and Independents.
Yeah, I guess my thought is I'm waiting to see the number of people. It's a weird year, getting people engaged with their schedules being very strange right now. I'm just curious to see the numbers that come in. I'm hoping it's a lot of people, but it could be that year where the involvement is maybe lower than normal. So,
And for me, the most important is making sure that our key demographics are represented rather than the size. To me, making sure that we have representation on this group is more important, again, than the final size number. So I'm not sure.
Can we define that?
Yes, I would love to.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was the next on my list. That's why I said it.
I'm reading your notes. Just kidding.
Stop it, Alex.
all right.
Do you want
That
me
probably
to?
gets us to the application information.
Yeah, it does. Here's what I was thinking in terms of key demographics. Obviously, must be a resident and a homeowner. I mean, that's obvious. But from there, I was looking at taxable value, length of current home ownership, so not specifically how long you've been in PR, but home ownership, lot size. I was also looking at family type and age and gender. Family type and age and gender seemed less important, but I also think in terms of family type, I was thinking, you know, someone who has a young family versus someone who is retired, single versus, again, someone like the two of you, you know, raising young families. But again, for me, it was taxable value, length of home ownership, and lot size.
And how do we get at the question of how people fall on this particular issue if we're not asking for how they voted?
We can't presume that the lot size determined how they voted.
No. Sorry, I'm going from the note, city clerk advises we cannot ask how an applicant voted on the millage. Asking question violates the right to secret ballot.
I put together a list of 20 sample kind of application questions, and I think we can get relevant information by not specifically asking how they voted. And I also think that at this point, maybe how people voted, and I'm thinking this through, isn't quite as relevant as making sure we have key representation of everyone to let them come into a room and kind of start from scratch and explore all the options.
I respectfully disagree. This was a razor thin margin win on the millage. The millage actually did not win on the in-person voting right after the absentees were counted, the mail-in votes were counted. That's what pushed the millage over. But there's a pretty substantial margin difference between those who voted yes and no on in-person voting. So I think it's important to have that difference of opinion on the board, and I wouldn't want to risk diluting the group by having it stacked one way or another.
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. But I think, again, not specifically asking how they voted, but asking, and if we want to go through the questions that I kind of created, getting an idea of what their feelings are. I mean, we can ask what their feelings are, we can ask what their goals are, we can ask all of those questions without specifically saying, how did you vote? And certainly, I think we can say, do you have any additional comments, any additional items that you want us to know? If people want to disclose, absolutely.
Okay, so we can have like an other category question. People can voluntarily offer this, but we can't. Is that
And
a law? Like
I guess my opinion is it's more important on this kind of committee to have people that will look at the facts and understand which levers can be pulled and not pulled, and then draw a conclusion based on what they hear from the other people around the table. And that's probably more important than the question about how they voted. So I don't have as strong an opinion about how people voted in the election as I do at this point, because the election has decided something already.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm trying to like do
So-
an isomorphic mix or match of like what the anti-gerrymandering group is doing, where it is like a blend. Like there are declared Democrats and declared Republicans and declared independents, which I think on one of your earlier Facebook posts was something you were calling for too, like just as far as just getting people from all the camps sitting down at the table. So
Oh, of course. But again, I am looking at camps now in terms of. I was looking, number one, at camps in terms of making sure we are hitting our different demographic, whatever that is. Again, taxable value, length of all of those things. Beyond that, again, without being able to ask that question, I think we can still get to it.
Yes.
What is your general
how
feeling
about-
about the project overall and the funding options? Do you have any other comments or information you wish to
Yeah.
provide? And again, to what Mayor Scott said is, what I think should be included on this application is a lot of questions about teamwork. Talk about times when you've worked with other people. Talk about times when you've had different
volunteering for the
opinions.
city. Yeah,
Give an example of time when you faced conflict while working with a team. How did you? Because to me, we want to get all of these different opinions, but we need to make sure we're getting people who are going to be open to having these conversations in a productive manner. So,
Right. I think it's important that we ask about other qualifications and things like that that they bring to the table, like what, when they, some of what they do for a living, or what they, what their expertise that they would bring to a discussion like this.
give some example of your teamwork. Again, I think we can get to that, and certainly people can provide it. And I do agree with you. We need to make sure that we are getting all opinions, and this is not stacked on either side. I mean, we want to have representation and different opinions and different views and different experiences and all of that stuff. So I agree with you.
And also people who are very open-minded and whatever to really investigating and looking at what the choices are.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So can we ask, or Jim, better maybe to you, can we ask either maybe like in a range of bands to say like, given the increase to your household as a result of the millage, like are you in the 120 to 250 per year increase? Are you in the 250 to 350 year increase? Are you in the 500 to 650 a year increase? Are you in the 650 to $1,800 a year increase pool? Because it's getting at the same kind of information, but approaching it in a different
Why
way.
would we ask that though if we could look it up on our side? I mean, not everyone might know that answer. I mean, certainly
would
we're going to have their
suggest
names
this.
and their
I would
addresses.
also suggest this. The committee will have the opportunity to look at the levers that they can pull. So that answer might depend on which levers they pull.
Totally.
So the outcome of the city, the commission, the committee won't necessarily lean one way or the other on that question.
I disagree.
I don't know that I don't know
And we
that
could
would
look them
tell
up.
me whether they should be on the committee or not, I guess is the way that I'm saying it, because ultimately there will be a small number of levers that they can pull one way or the other. And their conclusion might have nothing to do with how they pull the lever on their particular house, or on how the millage, as proposed in November, pull the levers on their house.
Well, and not everybody votes selfishly. Like I do know people who would pay less than the average who voted against the millage because it places an undue burden on new homeowners, especially. So yeah, I mean that's a fair point.
And again, I think you're talking about the millage and the effect, but what happens if the CAC comes together and really advises towards lot size? All of a sudden the millage, the effect of someone on the millage might be very different than what it was on the lot size. So I think just focusing strictly on the millage and things like that.
Or like frontage, and that's the other thing too, is I don't want to limit this group. Like I'm
Yeah, that's why I
concerned
put
if
lot
we're
size.
going to like start limiting this group before it even I don't know that there is a small number of levers. I think we need to leave it to our neighbors, our residents, to identify what these other levers may be. And as former Mayor Metzger said, I think it was my post, but now we have all the tools at our disposal. We have the full millage. We have all of these tools. The millage is the heaviest, most obvious hammer, but like it disproportionately affects a number of people. And in a city that typically votes millages in above 70%, this one like passed by the skin of its teeth.
So,
Well, we only have a few levers to pull, so I'm confident in saying that the committee can manage the few levers that we
So-
have to pull
And if
based
you
on
can
our legal
think-
constraints.
Yeah, okay.
but in coming up with who we want in this group, again, taxable value, length of ownership, I mean, if you are thinking of other levers that maybe I haven't thought of or other people, then let's include it in the list. So when we are putting together, when we're reviewing those applications, we are making sure we are hitting those people. These are what I thought of, but certainly if you have other thoughts of other ways people are going to be affected, let's add that to the list of consideration while we're reviewing the applications and putting the group together.
Is this something we can ask the bands?
You don't need to.
Only because we're going to get 30 applicants and
No.
we'll be able to look
If
them
you,
up.
if you give me an address, I can tell
Okay, so
you,
we're
I
going to
can tell
individually look
you.
up, okay, as long as we're going to individually look up 30 or so, I mean, I'm assuming 30 people, 40 people will apply. Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll get this texture whether or not we ask the people.
Yeah, all we need is address and name.
And the truth is, we should be looking at their water too. I mean, we should be looking at all of that stuff that people don't necessarily know if we ask them the question.
Right, and it's on the spreadsheet, so literally it's, when they apply, it's easy to see how the levers pull for their house.
I'm new to this commission. It took a lot of exhausting effort to get the sanitized data, so I'm not privy to this yet. I'll ask for it, and I'm sure I'll receive it.
What- So I believe, the other questions that actually, that ask more for people's backgrounds and things like that too. And their ability to work with other people, I think is really key. And that's what, we saw with the last CAC, how important that was.
So a purely practical question. Mr. Bruckman has to put application together. Would we like to provide him with any more detail than what we've given him to draft that so that we can look at it and approve it and not wait until the 14th to approve it? How do we want to do that?
I put together a list of questions. I'm sure everyone has
Yeah.
questions also.
Yes?
How does that work? I mean, do we just,
We can give him the authority to put put it out there. After getting our input, we'll all provide our input and then it gets done. But if we want it done before the 14th, then we'll have to allow him to do that.
will we get a chance to review it once?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm just thinking of the timetable.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I can email them over tomorrow and
Do you have enough to? Okay. Okay. Communication.
I don't, not to close this down, everyone email me your
Okay.
list of kind of questions you want on there,
great.
and then we can go from there.
Communication methods.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Can we comment at all while you're speaking, or do we wait till the end, or?
Sounded like
What I
the end.
suspect will happen is there will be a motion, and then we'll invite everyone to come up with questions or comments.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Just point of clarification, when do you need the questions by? Friday, tomorrow?
This, sooner the better. I don't know that there's a deadline. I mean, I suppose that's up to you if you want to create a deadline for getting me that.
My suggestion would be if we could have them all to him by Friday, then we'll have something back.
Yeah.
I think we've given him a lot already, but we might have some more.
Yes.
I think that's fine.
Communication. Sorry, did you have something?
No, I was going to say Mayor Scott. Yeah, I to the young lady who stood up, I just wanted to state I'm genuinely curious what everyone has to say. That's the reason all of you are here, I presume, is not to listen to us the whole time. So I'm genuinely curious to see, because you're all a very integral part of this process. And I'm also curious to see this, a lot of these things that we're getting at, a lot of the nuance and detail seems like something that the name of the person we're hiring,
Oh, the
Facilitator.
facilitator,
Yeah.
they would thank you.
I know,
It's been
I
a long
always-
day.
Yeah.
I think these are things that the facilitator would really be able to help and guide us. So I guess I don't want to put us behind. I'm just genuinely curious too, if a facilitator would help us craft a lot of these really help us massage this too.
Sure.
So,
And I suspect what will happen is we'll put out an application,
yeah.
and in between getting the application out and the first meeting, the facilitator will be known.
Okay.
And assuming that we approve the committee,
Right.
and then that gives us a chance to massage everything.
Perfect.
And my personal view is I wouldn't include a lot of the detail that we've just described into the
that
motion,
reason.
so that massaging could happen.
Cool. Thank you.
That would be my suggestion. I don't get to make the motion, so. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So, communication.
So I've spoken with some different residents and things like that, and we were talking about communication, sort of all forms, everything from, of course, it would be on the website, have a couple of e-blasts that go out, and we can determine like a number of e-blasts that we might want to request for the applications to go out, to be reminders and information pieces for the application going out. Posting it on the city Facebook page, and then also it can go on the other ones as well, that we all push it out as information. But then also a letter to each house. And I spoke with a couple of people about this, that it could be, would the application be in that letter as well as an application that's online?
Yes.
And then you have with that, maybe even there's a secondary postcard that could go out that, we talked about this, that it could be a, something that we get some volunteers to actually help get them in everyone's doors, so that like a letter goes out, and then now, there are so many cost-effective ways to do postcards and things that we could actually hand deliver those as just a follow-up about a week or so before, like the thing would be due.
I agree with that. I mean, letters in the mail are great, but they often get lost. So having, a bright kind of colorful postcard that we can get out,
So you're saying like 2 impressions then? They'll get a letter and then they'll get, okay, cool.
and they'll get a postcard. And I do think, and I agree with you with the volunteers. I mean, getting hopefully residents to help get them indoors. I mean, if we can get 2 people per street, it's a 30-minute job to just,
Yeah.
get them in the door.
I think the stakes are too high. Like, they need to be in there. Like, volunteers are great, but volunteers are also, like, you kind of get what you pay for to some extent. Like, I'd want to make sure, I mean, and the overall budget for the facilitator is under like $10,000. I'm like $600 to a, smallish, medium-ish budget item is
wait.
peanuts.
I understand that.
I'm saying use the mail. Use the mail and then make sure everybody gets it.
I'm saying, what I'm suggesting is mail a letter, hand deliver a postcard.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that too, just because it is a way, actually, to, when we're out there delivering those, it creates more conversation about it too. And it's like that way we can have our neighbors help tell each other too. And that's, I think, one of the richest ways for people to learn these
Yeah, I mean,
things.
we can hit them both ways.
Yeah. We were also talking about the yard signs that the city uses very effectively. And then,
Good idea.
of course, flyers up at City Hall and the Recreation Center. And, does that sound reasonable? Doable on your side?
Yeah, I would say that just because of the season, finding volunteers in between caroling and everything else that's going to be happening might actually be tough, but maybe I'm just being overly pragmatic about it. Maybe we'll have enough people to canvass the city. It is a nice way just to get them out there so that
Yeah.
we know that they've gotten there and they didn't get lost in the Christmas cards or the holiday cards. And
Catalogs and.
Yeah,
Catalogs and-
listen,
yes.
I can,
yeah,
I have no problem coordinating this. I can take the lead on coordinating it and getting it out there and getting volunteers, obviously with everyone's help, but,
Yeah.
spreading the word and we can coordinate it and get it out. And again,
Yeah, I think
I've
people
spent a
like
lot of time
volunteering.
going door to door, and it doesn't
Oh, yeah.
take it doesn't take that long once you're in a groove. So
so it sounds like we have plenty of ideas to just get the word out.
yeah, and I agree.
would say
paper.
the thing that I would add is there's probably some updates that we need to provide people through March, just so that everybody's aware of what's happening. So a monthly post on the website or something, so that there's no question that something's happening.
And what
Mr.
is-
Mayor, you have Mr. Shaw, I believe.
Just a quick question.
If you could, please.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
So
We'll go a
Perry
little out of
Shaw.
or- We'll go a little out of order.
Yeah, Perry Shaw, 3 Cambridge. Just, when is the next Ridger coming out? Would that make sense to include it with that?
Yes.
So,
Great point. Yeah.
Well, typically though, with the Ridger delivery, it won't be hitting mailboxes until the second week of January.
Okay.
Yes, yes. I would suggest that it's not for the application, it's just an update. Meaning,
Yes.
through the life of the committee, we want to let people know what's happening. And maybe the Ridger has a quick comment that says, we've gotten applications and those applications are closed, whatever that is.
Yeah, Ridger, the deadline for getting everything in for publication is usually about December 10.
Oh,
So we'll have to know what we're saying by then.
gotcha. Sounds like that just got,
I mean, we could push that a little bit, but with the holidays and everything, the December one, we usually have to get done earlier.
okay.
And Mr. Mayor, just to pin this idea, not for this discussion, but for some other time, but a ongoing segment in the Ridge. This is a 30-year project. This is a big, like, to keep eyes on it and to make it easy for people to keep eyes on it, it would be worth dedicating a small section of the Ridger to just what's going on.
The Ridger and the website, honestly.
Yep.
Ultimately, when you go to Public Works, it's something you see immediately. It's not a guess. Yeah.
But I'm saying specifically to the water infrastructure lead service line.
That's exactly what I mean.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Cool. We talked about application deadline,
Selection process.
selection process. We sort of touched on that a little bit. Were there more comments anybody had, or?
Well, we were talking about the different voting methods for that, and like doing a ranked voting method, and maybe, that won't be like the end-all type thing. We may have to have some discussion in there too, because we do want to make sure you have, some mix of gender and, age and some of the other things that may really come into play.
I agree with that. I mean, I kind of thought of it in a way that we start with our full, let's say we have 50 applications. We do our ranking, we discuss, we whittle that down. We then, we should talk about whether we're going to interview. But at that point, again, we interview potentially the smaller group. We then come back together, we do our rankings, we discuss, and we pick the final group. And I do agree with Ann that I think within the ranks, or however we choose to vote, we should have some built-in kind of stops. Maybe we vote on the first 3, we review, we discuss, we vote on the next ones, just so we make sure we're getting this balance of different residents with different perspectives. I just don't think it should be kind of a, it's not strictly by the winning number of votes. Our job is to make sure we're building a committee that is representative. So kind of building in discussion points between our votings.
If I think about the last one, I think we did something similar to that. We essentially had a lot of discussion around a vote. So I imagine that's how this would go as well. Yeah. But I suppose the bigger question is, would we want to plan some time around the interviews? And I'm thinking the answer is we want to interview. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I would say.
I'm hearing that.
I would say a smaller group.
It's not
Yeah.
everybody, but yeah.
I mean, that was my thought of whittling it down, doing a smaller group, and doing short interviews maybe over Zoom if that's easier. But
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll have to figure out whether it's 1 or 2 votes or how do we get to the smaller group, but I understand.
I think ranked choice voting is an important mechanism to explore as a way of delivering democracy in America. I think this would be a good opportunity to test ranked choice voting in our small and progressive community.
Gotcha.
yeah, I'm certainly open to that.
Maybe roll it out in a general election down the line, who knows, but pilot it
Yeah.
where the stakes aren't as high.
That's just us 5.
Yeah. No, I definitely support that. I think it will be interesting to do that.
Okay. Scope.
All right. So, I have a couple, with the scope, I think it's pretty, straightforward as far as, analyzing the possible funding sources for the lead service line and water main replacement, and seek a solution that is as fair as possible to a full range of residents. I think that's sort of the main scope. I think, there are things that are out of scope that I think it's important to consider, like reopening the question as to, whether the work needs to be done. I think also out of scope is the process for managing the work, because that is, that's the city manager and city commission's responsibility. And then I think, we established the time frame for the end of the CAC for, a date for the decision for their recommendation to come to the commission. And I think that timeline is something that has to stay.
Yes.
So my concern, I don't want to limit the scope of this yet to be determined, yet to be motioned to come into existence committee. I think that it's important to give our residents the grace to build this thing as it needs to be. I also don't see any major rush. I don't think anybody on the no side is against doing the work. I think we're all in agreement that the infrastructure project has to happen because it's a state mandate. Although we did kind of rush the millage, and there's new $1.3 billion state funding or federal funding to the state. So as far as the pedal to the metal approach, I want to be, I guess, cognizant of this to the extent that let's make it loosely defined enough that it's palatable to the five of us, that we vote for this thing to come into existence.
Well, the nearly 2 years of work that went into the millage was not a rush. So it may appear to that way to some people, but it was definitely not a rush. What I will say, though, is we just want to make sure that the work of the committee is focused, whatever the focus is, so that it's clear that everyone stays focused on that task. And as I mentioned earlier, the number of levers that can be pulled legally around the way that water is paid for by residents is limited.
Yep.
And that's the focus. How do we pull those levers?
I love it.
It's if we agree as a committee, as a commission, that that we want to give residents the option to have a voice through this committee, then we have to limit that scope for them to describe what levers they have to pull.
And I think you defined the problem statement perfectly. Can I make a motion then to create a CAC then?
Yeah, I think we're just about through the list, so if we just get through the rest of the list, I think we're ready.
All right. But I think that's perfect. That is the problem statement that we're solving for, is the funding of the water infrastructure project as defined as the water mains and the lead service line. That is the essence of this thing. And the rest of it, and as Commissioner Budnick pointed out, when the facilitator steps in, she's going to have some great ideas to help add muscle to the skeleton. So if I'm abusing that metaphor, tell me. But
You're not.
the idea though is that
One more.
right.
Can I say two things? Number one, I think that in my mind, the purpose of this meeting was to get out here and start talking about these. I agree that the facilitator is going to come in with all of their experience and contribute. But for me, the importance was to let the residents and everyone see us working through and start talking through some of these topics. I also think, on a kind of separate note, that we need to change the language around this vote no, vote yes. I mean, that's over. I mean, at this point, what we're talking about is, how are we going to fund this? I mean, it's not just about the millage. It's not just about the taxes. This is about how we are going to come up with a funding option. So we're no longer talking vote no against the millage or vote yes. I mean, we're talking about all of the options. So
There's a multitude of levers.
Right, of course.
Let's identify them all.
I just think that, again, I'd like to move past the vote yesers or vote noers and now talk about, together, how are we going to fund this? How is this group going to help us figure out the fairest way to fund this. And so to moving kind of past that, like, we're past the vote.
We are
We're
past
past it. So let's now move
I was
forward.
touching on a point that Commissioner Perry made, that there might be a sentiment that folks are against doing the work. I just wanted to clarify that I don't think in this no camp there are people who are against doing state mandated work.
Right.
So I just wanted to put yeah, and exactly, to move away from the radioactivity, let's say.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we should move together as a group here
Yes.
in the point of finding the funding option. And in terms of the mission statement, you know, I think the thought was to not, that the CAC within their scope is not to question the work. You know, that is already decided. The commission, or the CAC should be talking about the funding.
Of the
not-
lead service line and the water
And the
main.
water, right. The funding of the project, not going back to the drawing board of, should we be doing this at all?
Right,
And that was my interpretation of what you said.
right.
I'm not hearing, and I may be wrong, but I'm not hearing anyone question whether the work should be done, at least amongst the five of us.
Cool.
So it's really just a question of how do we, the funding of it, and getting the input from the citizenry around the funding of it. And I think and this is just me having looked at the numbers for so much in the last 6 months, actually the last 2 years. I know that there are only so many levers that can be pulled. So in my mind, I already know what the levers are. That's not intended to be a constraint. I just know that when we get into the discussion, legally, there's only so much that can be done in order to make sure that we do it correctly. So it's not intended to be a constraint. It really isn't. It's just what they can do.
Understood.
But I agree that it would be nice to get past the yes versus no thing. It's really just about getting a group of people together and deciding what's the good thing to do for the city and each person. One moment, please. And then the last thing we've got is the facilitator. Or facilitation, I should say, assuming we like a facilitator.
So I mean, we received the 3 recommendations of facilitators from the city manager. They look good. I know of 2 of the 3. But just, you know, in Googling them and looking them up and in their resumes, they look great. I mean, I think I'm comfortable with any of the 3. I know we had a recommendation from you of the one who you feel might be the strongest solution. I'm very comfortable going with that because it would save time if we can get a quote and see if it's a reasonable quote that fits in a budget, that scope that would work for this.
Right. I identified 3 options just from people I know of.
Yep.
And people I know who I think would be good at managing this. I did have what I would call my preferred choice just based on their experience. One of the things with funding and considering all of the options is having good municipal experience is a plus, so that we can remain focused on realistic options. So yes, feel free to choose from amongst those. Feel free to interview those people. Feel free to go out for an RFQ to identify other options. That was meant as a conversation starter. I think they would all be great options, but it's really up to you how you want to approach that.
I think we also need to check with them beyond just, I mean, I know we've seen the resumes, but availability.
Yeah.
I mean, there is like the question of we might have our preference, but the availability might not work. So do we want to set up a time to have a Zoom?
Do you know their availability?
Yeah, availability was clearly something I made sure that they had before
you.
putting them
Sorry.
before you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Now, that said, some of them have greater availability than others, and I'd be happy to go into that. But and one of the reasons we didn't want to push these out publicly in case that the commission wanted to go out for an RFQ, so that we could then put them in the pool of responses and you could evaluate them all together, and then that would be, kind of the public at that point. So, it will be made public who they are at the right time, depending on how you want to proceed. But they all have availability.
Okay, awesome. I mean, I know I Googled and stalked And I have a, no, that sounds bad. And certainly I have a preference based on, what I found, on their experience, so.
One thing I didn't, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, please.
may I? Yeah, so one thing I didn't see in the scope or in the other was kind of just the procedural, like, process of meetings, let's say. Like, we use Robert's Rule of Order here, or we attempt to. But are we going to use a consensus-based approach? So consensus is something that gets thrown out a lot. Consensus is not easy. Consensus is hard. But consensus also ensures that everybody is comfortable with what's being recommended. Majority rule definitely has its merits and its efficiencies. But I would also consider, including the qualifications of having some sort of consensus-based experience on somebody's CV that's going to be a facilitator.
Would you say that that's something that you would include in the motion or exclude from the motion?
I would
Because I
not
would actually-
include that in the motion. I'm thinking the motion should be exactly what you just said 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that's why I'm asking, only because I think we have time to figure that piece out. In fact, our facilitator might even have a recommendation that isn't
Right.
any of those.
They're going to say they're not for consent. Consensus is excruciating, but consensus is also the way to get the true voice of the people, not just the voice of the majority. So as we're looking to incorporate all voices of all neighbors, consensus gets us there.
No argument.
Okay. So I think, for me, the biggest question is, do we want to set up interviews with these people, or do we feel comfortable choosing? Right? Isn't that the next?
I'm thinking back to 2014, which is hard in 2021.
Yeah.
I think what we did is, in the last round, was actually we gave everyone the option to vote, right? But I don't think we did it in the same room.
I wasn't here.
Oh, that's right, you weren't. That's how hard it is to think back to 2014. I think we actually all voted individually, and then came up with a list of people, but there was still lots of discussion that had to be around a few people.
Are you talking about the individuals or the
No, the
facilitators? Because I was
facilitators.
talking about
I'm
I was
sorry,
talking about the
thinking about-
facilitators.
My apologies.
No. I was talking about getting it moving.
I think the question is, are we comfortable with these three, or do we want to do an RFQ? That's the bigger question. I'm comfortable with any of the three, just based on what research I did. We could do an RFQ, but that's just, it's time and money.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could, I was going to say I'm comfortable with any of the three, and I feel like a lot of what we're going to be looking for is going to come from, once again, the committee, the CAC, and the folks we have in the crowd. So I think the facilitator is just going to be one pushing this. So it's not
Right.
that. I feel like we have three good candidates from what I
Awesome.
saw. So
I agree.
Okay.
Unbiased. And do you feel, Jim, that any of those three candidates would be able to facilitate a consensus-based approach?
So let's
That's the
let's
direction.
define what consensus is.
Thank you.
Defining consensus, that's
Yes.
when there's a group of people and they don't stand up and leave the table until they're in agreement with what's on the table.
So agreement is when I've done this, the definition of consensus is something you start with, because you're right that that is the goal of what this group is supposed to arrive at. And for me, setting up consensus to mean agreement is setting yourself up for failure.
It's not agreement.
Okay.
It's the most desirable solution for the group of people sitting around the table.
So I think the most useful definition of consensus that I've used is a result that everybody can live with. Because not everyone's going to like it. It's not going to be everyone's preferred outcome, but it's something that everybody can live with. And I think that's a realistic goal that you can get to in a group. Because clearly, if you have 9 or 15 or 18 or however many opinions are on a table, agreement is not something you're going to get. But saying, what, okay, I've been heard. My points have been considered by the group. Everybody at the table can see, some of themselves in the recommendation or the decision, and everyone can live with it. That's what I would suggest we to find consensus.
I read through the minutes from the CAC in 2014, and there were individuals who stood aside from the vote and said, like, I did not vote for this. So what you were just describing, in an ideal world, in majority rule happens, but when it's a consensus-based approach, it's required. I've been in some consensus groups before. The Millennial Mayors Congress, which was the side and sorry if I'm going down a rabbit hole, but a side project with the Michigan Suburbs Alliance was a consensus-based group of young people when I used to be young and elected leaders in the region. We made a charter. We did lots of stuff, multiple initiatives. I presented to this commission in my earlier years, and like we had resolutions passed via consensus. Like it's not impossible.
Are you suggesting, though, that if the group is not able to reach the consensus by our deadline, that no recommendation is made?
I'm not here to say what that's going to happen, but that's how consensus works.
I
guess
think
I
that's
would-
setting us up to not have a recommendation if we are, I mean, if there is two
Or
people
creates
who's,
fire under people to come to an agreement too. I mean, like this is how like union negotiation works too. Like it all happens at like the 11th and a half hour. Like unless you light that fire, like people don't come. There's a whole lot of dancing
Right.
around, and then then there's decisions.
Here's what I'd suggest. I don't want to presume that the number of people that we choose couldn't come up with something that they could live with. So let's assume that they might. And the reason we have a facilitator is to come to the decision whether something more is needed to get people to agree. I mean, that's part of the value of having a facilitator is to work that out. I don't want to presume the method that they work that out. So that's something the facilitator would figure out for us.
I'm not comfortable with that. I mean, I think that we are writing the scope document for whoever this facilitator is, and we get to tell them what to do because we're paying them money.
so in your perfect, not, that sounded obnoxious. Are you suggesting again that it would, that the recommendation would need to be at full consensus?
Yes, like a jury or something.
Okay,
like this.
and
Like,
let's
we,
say
we
the
use
deadline.
consensus a lot in our society.
course.
Not a lot, but
Let's say
it's-
the deadline is the end of March. And by the end of March, a consensus cannot be met, cannot be reached.
Mhm.
At that point, do we go with the 8, let's say it's a group of 9, the 8 majority? Or do we say,
I mean, we can
no
cross
consensus.
that bridge when we come to it. It sounds like Jim even said like the recommendation is somewhat fungible. It can be done in March. It could be done in April. Ideally, it's done in March. This is a 30-year project too, so we're kind of racing to this finish line in March 2022 when, you know, and for cost and stuff, right? Like this is like millions and millions of dollars. Like, yeah, we need to be
So if I
cognizant of cost, but just time and scope and money, like
may, just
we need
to
to
answer the question
aperture.
of the timing, the reason we have the timing deadline is because we will decide to do something for the July budget, which must cover the money that we will spend on, I think it's Kensington, or on Kensington for the next year. So we will make a decision about how to start the spending, because we don't want to dig up Kensington twice. So that's basically what the timing is about. It's not a rush. It's something that we've known we need to do for some time, and now we're figuring out the method to do it.
I mean, if I guess I made a note here saying, if the CAC cannot come with a recommendation by this date, then it falls back to the city commission to make the recommendation. I don't agree that a full consensus, if we have a majority by the end and there just cannot be a consensus reached amongst the group, that we shouldn't still be listening to their input and incorporating that into the decision making.
All right, so just to be clear, so you're not for consensus then?
In an ideal world, of course I'm for consensus. All I'm suggesting is that if by the deadline a consensus cannot be met, what we should have is a full written report. It should break out the votes, and from there we can have minority reports of the other opinions, laying it out so that as a commission we then have all of the information. I'm just saying that I don't want to
doesn't-
have no recommendation because a consensus can't
It's
be
not
made.
a null from the output from the committee.
Yeah.
If 2 out of 9 or 1 out of 18 or whatever number don't agree on everything, or if the whole thing is totally split. We don't know who we're picking. We don't know what their opinions are. That's why we're picking a good facilitator, in my view, to help that process along. A good facilitator will help drive people to determine whether they can live with something together.
And from,
And I would say, we don't need to figure that detail out tonight. We just need to be certain that we pick a facilitator that's good at that.
and as long as at the end of it, we're receiving all of the information so we understand what that breakdown was, or what that division was, and if it was 50, you know, if I just want to make sure that at the end of the day we have all of that information, and we know the numbers, and we understand what happened.
And I think if we go back to the whole thing of the organization of the CAC, it would be something, you know, like the last one where we did have, they selected a chairperson and a co-chair, and then we were talking about, like, there would need to be notes and things like that, like minutes of the meeting,
course.
is that right?
Yep.
And then what would be the best way for those to happen?
So for the last CAC, there was a chairman and a secretary, and the secretary took the notes,
Okay,
and they were presented. The interim city manager at the time, you know, read through the notes and formatted them so they were in, you know,
Okay.
a format, and then they were presented at the next meeting.
Okay.
Also, the facilitator did do some pretty detailed notes
Okay.
and minutes, so we did
Okay,
use a
great.
lot of his.
thank you.
All right. I think that brings us to the end of that. Now the question is the motion.
Can I actually ask one more question? I'm
Sure.
sorry. It's about the application process. I'm wondering if, and I'm sorry to add to kind of the work and the time frame here, but we're sending out an application, and I'm wondering if with that we should also have, you know, some version of bylaws or principles of conduct or even scope, so that when people are applying, they're also agreeing to, you know, what we determine to be, you know, the role of the CAC, of, again, these bylaws and just things. Am I crazy?
That's really more appropriate for the facilitator and the group to define for
Okay.
themselves. You know, when you're getting down to bylaws or codes of conduct,
Okay.
that's something that the group needs to agree upon amongst themselves and self-govern, in my
Okay.
opinion.
It's probably the first meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first meeting
I
is
just
in-
wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
Yeah.
we made sure that the group went
Which-
together,
Now,
was going to have a
a
focus.
general scope statement, you know, something along the lines of what has been discussed in terms of, you know, like what the motion says. Absolutely, you know, that I think conveys the purpose of the group.
Great.
Okay. I think we're ready to make a motion. And for everyone, it's interesting because this would typically be a workshop meeting where we would have this discussion and then bring it to a vote. So it's interesting to have it here so you can see the work in progress. But I think we've worked ourselves up to a motion. And then we hear from you.
What would you say the motion is?
Yeah, you had
Let's see.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I move we form a citizens advisory committee to explore all possible funding options for the water infrastructure project, to include the main service line and lead service line, and create a recommendation for the city commission to make an informed decision. And we don't want to include timing on this, right? Because, I mean, there's a chance the CAC could make a recommendation in 2022 and then in 2023. So let's limit it maybe just to
It's 2022.
2022.
Yeah, sorry.
Point of clarity, just the specific words were main service line and lead service line.
Water main and lead service line. I'm going from memory. So.
Yes, that covered both, I think.
Language is important.
Yes,
It is, yep.
that's what I heard. Do we have a second for that motion, or do we need to be any more clear before we second?
Yeah, should we write it? And
I second.
Any further discussion before we open it to the floor?
No, sir.
All right,
Thank you.
please, in no particular order. Please.
George Lenko, 32 Oakland Park. Thank you for holding this meeting, first of all. I'm in full support of a CAC, but I disagree with the opening premise, and that is that a recommendation needs to happen by March. I'm going to re-ask, what's the rush? The reason I re-asked that is because I asked that in April at the informational meeting when it seemed that federal dollars might be allocated. And then we had an election, and then federal dollars were allocated. And the governor just issued an executive directive that, that they want to prioritize lead service line replacement for communities that have been disproportionately burdened. Well, we have high cost per resident, higher, I would even guess, than Flint or Benton Harbor. Maybe not more lead, but higher cost per resident. And then we have, I'm sure, a higher percentage than those communities. The other thing that the governor suggested was we need to take a dig once approach, and that's not just the service lines, but also high-speed internet, the road, other utilities, Edison, consumer power, and good grief, before 30 years are up, somebody's going to be asking us why we still have combined sewage. You know, all that's going to happen in a 30-year horizon. There's much we don't know, and I'm sorry, even with the money distributed to the states, we may not know by March what piece of that we're going to get. So to me, the March recommendation is going to be, how do we go through one more year while we plan for the Kensington project, do the Kensington project right, more right than is even envisioned, Edison, consumer power, internet, you name it. We have aging infrastructure. And a year from now, we will know much more than we know right now. So the CAC, I would respectfully suggest, ought to focus on maybe an interim recommendation for March, nothing more than that. And we got 29 more years of a 30-year project. There will be many more variables that happen between now and then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Just one quick comment. It's not a rush, it's a plan. The plan needs a starting point and an end point, and that plan may change as we get more information. So, and that's okay.
The motion on the table was lead and water.
1 year from today.
Edison, consumer power, I'm thinking those are things that ought to be investigated immediately. And the other thing that ought to be investigated immediately, or even us, the city, hiring a paid lobbyist to knock on a lot of doors and make sure that as the state prioritizes the federal dollars, that we're not the ones at the back of the line. There's a whole lot more than the scope that was proposed.
Sure. The other quick correction is nothing has been allocated to Pleasant Ridge. Just to be clear, there has been money that's been allocated to the state of Michigan, but to my knowledge, at least as of today, nothing's been allocated to Pleasant Ridge.
You don't ask, you don't get it. Right.
That's for sure. We'll ask. Thank you. Other comments?
I have a question,
Mm-hmm.
because I heard more than a few comments that this was a state mandated project. My recollection is about 1/3 of it is a state mandated project and the rest isn't. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
Maybe not exactly a third. Yeah.
30%, 35%, 37%, pretty soon we're talking millions of dollars. Maybe the scope should not be limited and be able to examine the part that is not a state mandated project. Because the way you're defining the scope almost defines the answer. You can't do this, you can't do that.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Dan Riley, 30 Oakdale. Couple things. One, you guys could probably use a parliamentarian. At least down the road somewhere. I'm not sure if I enjoy watching sausage get made in this process or not, but I will say a couple things. One, I think a lot of things I heard are positive, and I think a Citizens Advisory Commission could be advisable, but I think some of the language and some of the relitigating of the millage vote, you had mentioned by razor-thin margins several times. I might add that all of your seats were won by relatively razor-thin margins. You know, handfuls of votes, all right? So, but the bottom line is, it did pass, all right? So this whole idea that there's camps and litigating the camps and asking detailed questions about their voter information and, you know, I've heard means tests used in these meetings before. You guys got to be really careful about this process because I'll tell you what, if you start to get into those layers, you're going to start World War IX here. And there's a reason we elected you guys and why we have confidence in Jim is to a certain degree to figure this out. And Alex, well, the consensus demand is an interesting process. It's not something you can build into the scope immediately because you're going to end up running nowhere because you have people with very strong opinions about different things. So I personally came into the room thinking it was probably a good idea to create a citizen advisory committee based on some of the opinions and questions and back and forth and lack of understanding of just how people will perceive interviews and the process and scrutiny. Might be something better that the city commission and the city manager take on themselves for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. And then,
Go ahead.
yes, please.
Yeah, Barry Canistry, 10 Hanover. I have to agree with the gentleman who just spoke. We elected you. We placed our confidence and our respect in you and your capacity to make choices and to guide us. Someone spoke about watching sausage being made. No, it's not a pretty thing. But nevertheless, I'm glad to be here tonight. I came with an open mind. I hoped to hear some suggestions that would open my own thinking to alternatives related to the success of the millage vote. But I didn't. The only suggestion that I've ever seen come from the no vote camp has been one size fits all. And to me, and this has been presented in the name of fairness, I don't find one size fits all to be fair at all. I'm a little surprised that you are in the weeds so deeply without the idea of a citizens committee being firmly established as legitimate or necessary. I really don't. We elected you. We had a millage vote. Yes, it succeeded narrowly, but then your campaign succeeded narrowly, as someone else has said. So I would personally, I feel a sense of disappointment that I can't be walking away from this meeting without a clearer sense of the potential alternatives that might be under consideration in the minds of those who wanted to, in effect, make an end run around the millage vote to establish a citizens committee. I regret that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, please.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comment. And part of my reluctance to give recommendations tonight is I don't want to influence what this board may or may not recommend. Like using the scientific method, you start with a hypothesis, but you don't start with your conclusion in mind. Otherwise, you're proving to that conclusion, right? So whether it's frontage of your house, whether it's lot size, like Commissioner Schmier brought up, There are myriad other ways of calculating this thing. The ready to serve, you're clearly against that, but I mean, that is the one size fits all approach. So there are more than a handful of viable other ways of calculating this. Also, and former Mayor Metzger even pointed out on a post, right, like the idea that we have multiple levers. So we could, potentially raise or levy 1 mil out of the 3.5 mils, or 2 mils out of the 3.5 mils, or 3.5 mils out of the 3.5 mils. But there needs to be a conversation of what that blended approach is, and a consensus, in my opinion, of the residents, for what it's worth.
And if I may, just another quick comment. In a personal opinion, we have until July to set the next, well, actually we have until June to approve the next budget for July. So that gives us time to just get feedback from people. So I'm actually not opposed to the CAC, because it gives us that opportunity for people that may not have been able to be engaged the way they would normally be engaged because of COVID and other things, to hear what's going on. It's just a little bit more time for everybody to become familiar and comfortable with whatever decision comes for the next budget year. So I think it's a healthy process. I don't have any problems with the CAC. I just happen to know how many levers there are to pull. I know which ways we could pull them. I know what latitude we have. And from a purely legal perspective, just having looked at this for some time, and so I'm comfortable that this will help bring that to light, make everybody comfortable with what we can do. That's why I didn't discuss it tonight. I want to see how other people pull the levers to confirm what I feel pretty strongly about. Thank you, though. Yes, please.
All right, I'm Doug McElroy, 27 Oakland Park, most recently.
You've done this before.
Yeah, a few times. I have two things points I'd like to make, or questions to ask. One is, we've talked a lot about setting up this Citizens Advisory Committee. There has been no discussion to this point is if this committee comes back with a recommendation that you don't like. Is it just a recommendation, or is it something that you are committing to follow through on the will of the people as defined by this committee? And I don't have the answer to that, but I think you do need to address that. And I think you need to address it openly and honestly. And it's probably not an easy conversation to have, and it's probably a easier decision to make after you see whether you like it or not. So that's point one. Point two is I'm a little concerned about the scope of the CAC as it's been defined. Part of what came up in the public meetings were how we're scoping out the water main replacement. The lead service lines, I'm not an engineer. Okay, my guess is there's really not a lot of options for how you make those updates. The water mains, we're going from a 6-inch line that's partially occluded by crap on the inside. So we've got a 4-inch water main that is servicing the city in the 4 homes that I've been in, fine. If you have a hydrant flush off in one part of the city, yeah, I guess it makes a difference in that. But, I've heard about, I think Jim said that there's a possibility that coming up Oakland Park, they'll replace that 4-inch now clear passage with a 12-inch water main, which to me sounds like MDOT putting 87 lanes out on Woodward Avenue. We're now taking some of those lanes out. Government entities tend to over-engineer infrastructure projects. And that is part of what I think we do need to look at very carefully. We need to have adequate infrastructure, but the bigger you make it, the more it costs to dig out a passage to get the lines through, the more the materials cost, and that impacts the cost of the project. And that I don't think has been part of this discussion at all. If we're just going by the engineer saying, well, while we're at it, let's add a 12-inch line to get over here, and let's add another backflow over to the other side, underneath the highway. And I don't remember the map that well, but where we were going to cross Woodward for a secondary supply over to the east side, that's the ditch, man. I don't even know how you get through there without a pretty major undertaking. No?
That's not where it's proposed. It's at Woodward Heights, and it's an existing crossing.
Okay. It's an existing crossing for what?
To serve it, provide water to the east side.
Okay, so the other one is,
There is a crossing at Elm Park. That one's not being replaced because that specific water main that goes under the ditch was put in when the ditch was built. So that's one of our few sections of new water main that remains.
okay, so the new one is the one further south?
Correct. The one that crosses from the Saukwa gate supply near Oxford. It
Okay.
crosses Woodward. And
All right.
that was not replaced when Woodward was done. That needs to be replaced.
But it is existing.
It is existing now.
Then what was the conversation about adding a new one to add a secondary path for water?
That was water main up Indiana.
Right.
To loop the east side because we have long runs and
Okay.
long dead end runs on the east side that exist currently.
Okay, all right, so it wasn't crossing Woodward. Okay, well then I misunderstood. Point still being, I believe there's a tendency to, hey, while we're at it, it's like, instead of doing porcelain, I can do Carrera marble in my bathroom. There's scope creep and it does affect the cost and it does affect what all of us are going to have to pay. So I would appreciate, thinking that over carefully.
Would it be okay if we answered that outside of the meeting? Because I think we know that, but we can give you the detail.
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, fine. All right, that's all I got.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Yes, please.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Chris, it's
oh,
not-
sorry. It was
Yeah.
Perry, actually.
Sorry, I gave him the go.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Perry.
I got so excited to be you for a minute.
Hi,
Sorry, Gary.
Jeff Hand, 8 Oxford. I actually just want to follow up on Doug's comment mostly. I was a member of the CAC in 2014. And I can tell you as a member of that committee, the most frustrating thing is that you go through the process and then you have recommendations that are ignored. I'm in 100% support of doing a CAC, but you need to be committed to hearing the recommendations of the CAC. And I'll give an example of something that was recommended out of that I heard tonight that's being considered to be ignored, and that is to go out and get 3 quotes for everything that you're going to do when you go outside. So we're already looking at picking a facilitator without looking at all the options and making sure that it's cost effective and it's the right facilitator. So I use that as an example. One other comment, I heard something about somebody hand distributing these application notices and that way being able to make comments to people about the process. I just would be careful that that is representative if that happens. And we have a perfectly good process called the mail to get mail and of course all other forms of communication to get things in front of people that would be considered for the CAC. So those are my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shaw, sorry.
That's all right. No, I can wait till, I hope maybe this is the end, but, so Perry Shaw, 3 Cambridge. Couple of things. First on the application information or just the selection process. We've done this at work multiple times. This seems to work well. Something to be considered. Blind selection process. You don't need names. You don't need addresses. All you need to know is the information that you've proposed and multiple times the different types of information. So that's one thing I'd recommend. That will remove biases. Number 2, about the timing. I'm kind of with George again on this. I think this CAC needs more time. I think charging towards a March timeframe for a 30-year project, that's quite a large undertaking. I'm not saying it's not doable, but my thought is that if we already know that we have a way to fund Kensington, why not let this commission play out? Why not take the time to try to get the funding from the state? Let those things play out. By the way, the state funding is going to probably be more difficult now, knowing that we've passed a millage, knowing that the state sees that the citizens have said, we're good to pay for it. So that in itself is going to be a more difficult process to consider, and we're going to need more time and effort to fight for that. To George's point, probably need somebody third party to go do that fight for us. So I would recommend that we take that time, that consideration of getting that money, because we should get some of it. It'd be kind of wild to me if we don't. And then see where we fall, where the chips play, right? And then make decisions based on that. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the only quick comment I would make to that is I don't think that being prepared and having a plan in place to do the work we're required to do will prevent us from receiving funds from the state if they're available. So we just have to be we're going to be really aggressive on looking for money from the state, as we are for everything. And in fact, we've actually received money from from the state for projects that we've done because we've been incredibly clear. We put good proposals together. We're fixing Main Street. We put special pavement in certain places in town because we've just been good about putting proposals in. So we will do this here as well. Thank you. First here, though. Sorry.
Jay Ahmed, 92 Kensington. A couple of things that are not on the list that is on the screen, and then some questions about what's on the screen. First, anonymity. To Perry's point, I think that's a good suggestion. I'll leave it to you folks to figure out how you work that out. I think there is the appearance of bias. I'm not suggesting that anyone would be biased by necessarily seeing someone's name or their address in the selection process, but I think when you have a blind process without names and or addresses, it certainly enhances the idea that this was independent and objective and transparent. But I'll defer to you folks to work that out. The second thing about the application process, and just thinking for myself, and I'm sure others, is that if I'm applying, the first thing I'm going to want to know is what's the commitment? What am I going to have to do? How often are the meetings going to be? How much time? And I don't know that that was specifically addressed in what was going to be in the application, is that here's what you're signing up for. And then with regard to what's on here, again, I'll echo what's already been said about the timeline. If we have to have a recommendation for 2022 by March, April, May, then have the commission do that. But I don't know necessarily that their tenure has to end with that single, what may be just an interim recommendation, if you understand what I'm saying. They can rejoin the discussions potentially later in the year or just meet monthly or whatever it may be. I'm not comfortable saying, here's your charge and it ends on April 20th and then you're done. Because I think it would be beneficial to have the Citizens Action Committee involved down the line. Now, I'm not saying, 5 years, 10 years, just a suggestion for the committee. In terms of number of members, I don't know that it necessarily needs to wait to see how many people you get back in terms of application. I think irrespective of whether it's 1,000 or 100, you should be able to work out what the number is in terms of how many people you have rather than wait and see what you get back. And it should be a workable number. Obviously, the more, if we're doing a consensus base, the more difficult it will be. I am in favor of the idea, I think it was Katie that brought it up, with sort of the way the courts do it, or the appellate courts anyway, is that if you can't reach a consensus, that you have what I'll call a majority opinion and then a dissenting opinion. And you can have as many of those as you want, and the committee can give it its due regard. But that leads me to the most important point, I think, which people have spoke to as well, and that is that I do think there needs to be some indication, and again, I'm not smart enough to know what that involves, but some indication that there will be deference given to the recommendation by the committee. There has to be some sort of commitment to listen to it and enact it. And the consequence to not acting it can't just be a political consequence. Like, people can't run against you saying, well, they didn't do what the CAC said, so vote him out of office. That's not a good enough resolution, at least I think. You're going to have citizens who volunteer, put in their time, effort, and as Jeff said, I mean, it's got to be so disheartening to do all that and then recommend it, and for the committee to say, or the commission to say, thanks for your time, but the adults will handle this from here. I think, and again, I don't know how you write that out, what that looks like, but I do understand and believe in that point very much so. So yeah, that's all I have. But thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you.
I am definitely in support of the CAC and hope that you enact.
I guessed. Just on your last point, and because it's come up a couple of times, my thinking is that all of the junior commissions have at times made recommendations to the city commission where some decision had to be brought up to the city commission. And those decisions are usually treated with, I'll use your word, deference. It may not be that they agreed, but at least there was very thoughtful, very considerate thinking around the output that came from that committee, and I wouldn't expect any less for this. Before, actually, sorry for pointing too. I'm just seeing around something.
Hi.
Hello.
Susan Vert, 20 Kemperton. Anyways, I appreciate all you guys having this great discussion. I don't come to many city commission meetings or workshops. Maybe that will change. But I just wanted to state I'm in favor of the CAC. And I personally want to understand the depths that the city is going to try to tap into this infrastructure bill funding. What are we doing and who are we talking to? I think it's really easy, maybe the easy way out to just say, let's just do the millage. Let's not do the footwork required to contact the state and figure out, how can we, because the voters said, hey, take my money, basically. So I would like to make sure that we are ensuring that our city representatives are doing what they need to do to get the most that we can get. Because I think also if they know that the vote was so close, really it was 50-50, quite frankly, for the most part. And if they understand that there's significant concern, I think that maybe they'd be more likely to give Pleasant Ridge more funding. I have no idea. But I think it's a possibility. So I would want to have an understanding that we're doing everything that we can do in that area. I also would like the project to be done sooner than 30 years. I'm 55. I think my street will be done at the end of my lifespan. I won't benefit at all from this project, but I'll be paying into it for the next 30 years. Someone mentioned on the Facebook page about doing a bond and blah, 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 and that we could do this within 10 or 15 years. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I think it would be nice if we could have this done sooner rather than later and take advantage of today's lower relative costs compared to future costs of doing this project. I think that would be really nice. And especially if there's other cities doing this work, I imagine that bidding it out, it's going to be competitive and companies are going to raise their rates, quite frankly, over 30-year time frame. And let's see. Lastly, I wanted to mention that my house, I have to pay $645 as it stands for the millage in addition. So I'd like this group, I know this is about CAC tonight, but I'd like the city commission in general to look at taxes overall. If I have to pay $645 more, then I want it to go down by $645 somewhere else. So I would call for immediate halt to collect the park millage personally, which I didn't vote for. Anyway, and I voted for all the other millages except for that one. But so I just was kind of miffed. And this is a personal thing about the fire pit and the pavilion, and then knowing that we're going to be having this significant expenditure for every single household, but yet this group decided, let's go ahead and do this. And I just felt that I wanted you guys to take a look at that and see if there's some rearrangement of funding that can be made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry,
Yes, please, Mr. Brockman.
Yeah, since these have come up a couple times, I'll start from the end and work my way back. The park millage, the pavilions were not done with tax money. Those were done with the SCAF Park Special Revenue Fund. It's an endowment fund for parks for the city. The Mayor Costelli and Brett are representatives on that board. So those were not tax dollars that were used to build those. The rest of the I'll not touch the rest of the parks millage. It'll end in 3 years anyways. In terms of funding generally, so of course we're aggressively pursuing all avenues. Even before the infrastructure bill was funded, we worked with Congressman Levin's office on a community projects program that they were doing. Basically what that is with this federal Congress, they reinstated earmarks. So we submitted the Kensington Water Main project for funding for that. They had over 3 dozen projects that Congressman Levin's office received applications for, similar to that. They chose ours to forward on as one of 10, and it was appropriated by the House. So that's $650,000 of federal funding that we're still hopeful will show up. It's dependent on the rest of the political process in D.C. In terms of the infrastructure bill, it is correct that for water infrastructure, that money is being allocated to the state drinking water revolving loan funds. So Eagle has a process, and there's state law and federal law that govern how that money is distributed out. So yes, Michigan is getting $1.3 billion. Some of the estimates to replace only lead service lines across the state are about $2.5 billion. So yes, it will be competitive. There will be a process to access the federal money through the state drinking water revolving loan fund. We are going to be applying for that. And in terms of the question of using bond financing to forward the money, the challenge was that we have a debt cap. We can only issue so much debt based on our taxable value in the city, and we can't issue enough bonds to pay for the entire project. So we would have to choose a portion of the project to do, pay off those bonds, and then 20 years from now come back and finish the project, or find some other way, while the financing cost basically eats up our yearly revenues. Now, that said, the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund could be a vehicle for us to do this project much quicker. We're not closing the door on that, but we don't know what that looks like. We have funding sources. Whether we have a millage or whether we do this through water rates, doesn't matter. The state doesn't care. The state would say, okay, you have a millage, that's great. If we didn't have a millage, they'd say, okay, you have water rates, that's great. You're going to pay for this. So whether we have the millage or not is really not a factor in any funding decisions we get from the state. If we will be now submitting an application to the state Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, a notice of intent to apply. I'm getting into the weeds, but we're in the weeds, so here we are. That will be due in January, and we're going to be submitting the entire project in our intent to apply. And then what that will trigger is a review with Eagle about what we're asking for in year 1 versus year 2, 3, 4, 5. The money that's being allocated from the federal government to the state revolving loan funds is coming over the course of 5 years. So it's being sent out $250 million, $260 million over the course of 5 years. So that money is going to roll out over time through the state. So we may have the opportunity to break our project up into 5 parts and seek funding through the Drinking Water Loan Fund to forward those projects and to do more quickly. And then we would repay that loan. And usually the benefit of that is there's some principal forgiveness or grant attached to an award from the Drinking Water Loan Fund. So that's where you access the free money that you don't have to repay to the state. So yes, we are looking at financing options to get the project done quicker. We're looking at every avenue of how to do this project for the lowest cost and the quickest amount of time. We've been in contact with Congressman Levin's office. We've been in contact with Representative Weiss's office and Senator Moss's office, all about, applying for this. The answer right now is that the state doesn't even know. You're right. The governor issued that order to dig once. So, separating and doing the water mains later isn't in compliance with the dig once principle that the governor has set forth. So that's a consideration in when we're putting together our application to the state for the funding. But ultimately, the state legislature and Eagle have to come up with their rules for how they're going to distribute this money. And of course, we're talking to all of our representatives and everyone in Lansing. We've been talking to Eagle, who will be in charge of a lot of this. So we're working on all of that. We're looking at financing options. Absolutely. So, yeah.
Actually, if I may just get to someone that hasn't spoken yet first.
Hi. I'm Lynn Nelson at 28 Elm Park, aka Helen Stojek. My friends call me Lynn Nelson, and they're all in Pleasant Ridge. So, A couple thoughts were running through my mind. Alex, thanks for inviting me to the meeting. We had a talk. My professional career is communications, consulting. I've done both government and private sector. And I listened with some interest with what Jim said. And I think the reason I'm for a group, a citizens group, is you all can say things over and over again, but it's perception versus reality. Your message should be to the citizens of the city that no, we're going to turn over every rock and look for everything we can do because we know this is expensive. We share your pain about this because it's expensive. But when another group comes in and says, and reviews it and says, look, we've looked at everything. We've looked at all the levers. And guess what? Those are the only levers. So I would be very supportive of a group doing this. A couple other things. I don't know about a consensus, but they can certainly come up with several recommendations that are different that you can all consider. So I'm definitely for it. I think part of the reason some of the noise came out about this is that it was perception versus reality. Your perception might have been, we've been talking about this for 2 years, but the perception of your audience was they didn't know about it. And perception counts in today's world. So I would say, when you send out that communication, have some really good key messages on it, like we are going over and above because we realized there was a lot of dialogue in this community about this. And there was a lot of back and forth, and we want to make sure that you all understand what we're doing. I will say that there was a lot of discussion about what you wanted out of the members, but not enough discussion about what you wanted out of them. And as somebody mentioned, what's the time commitment? What's the goal and objective of this committee? You're asking a lot of, some people might be turned off by some of those questions you're asking, by the way. And maybe you want to look at also the skill set that they bring and how that brings you to the objective,
Yes.
right? So that's all I have to say, and I think it would be a good idea to have one. I do think that could be longer term, where you bring the group back in a year or two to review things and see how everything's going. Because, with the road millage, Jim and I were talking about, that kind of got changed after, I was here when that passed. I wrote the newsletter for the city for that. And about 5 years into it, the costs went up for the asphalt and everything else. So some of the things we started doing on some of the streets, we couldn't get done. That's why Elm Park was done. A lot of things on Elm Park were already done because we were one of the first streets. And there wasn't a committee there to come back and kind of say, you know what, maybe we should go back to everybody and ask for a little bit more money so we could get this whole shebang done versus just the roads. So I would consider that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I real quick,
sorry,
I would just add that it is very common practice for a CAC to be a standing body. So the idea of bringing them back a year later or something to reevaluate is absolutely standard practice for that. So
We may have other things to cover, for sure.
And then I have a quick question. Do you have a summary of some of the work that you've been doing, like requesting information from the funding from the different state and federal entities?
Well, yes, as you know, we've been working on
Yes.
that. And one of the things that we want to do is get that in the next Ridger and get that out. And that's why we've been working to try to fine tune that language. I'll be bringing that at the December meeting.
Okay.
For approval to distribute from this group.
Great. Thank you.
It's probably also worth noting, and it's maybe a segue to Mr. Lenko. At least personally, I know that over the next 10 years, we're going to see some other infrastructure projects. There's just a lot going on. Half of your homes are going to have electric charging stations for your next electric car. So that's work that we know is coming, but that shouldn't stop us from planning what we know exists now. So that's kind of my focus, is to make sure that we get a plan in place for the things that we know now. This plan will change from year to year as we learn more about new things that are coming. And we might get some financing from the state that helps modify that plan, but we need to have something in place so that we set a reasonable budget for July. And we'll have another discussion in 2022 around changes that might come as a result of more things we learn.
Thank you. And George Lenko once again, and that was a good segue, Jim, as you went through the funding sources. One of the ones that I didn't hear that I'm interested in, because I do believe in dig once, but I believe in dig once and done. How much is Edison bringing to this? Because Edison finally announced that in established neighborhoods where they have electrical problems, they're ready to put it underground. And that's on their nickel, not, well, I mean, on the ratepayers' nickel, but it wouldn't be at a city cost. When we approached them, what did they say? Or Consumers Power, I thought I heard, was actually interested in some dig enhancements as well. So there's many funding sources if we're going to do what the governor advocates, and that's do it all and get it right. Make it look like Troy. I mean, of course, with nice neighbors and nice houses, but
We'll edit that part.
yeah. But if everything's going to go underground, isn't Kensington the opportunity to see what that looks like?
And I would say the answer is maybe. There are some practical challenges to work through. In Troy, most of your power lines are not in the public right of way. A lot of them are along the rear property line. So when you newer developments, that's where they're located. So practically, if we put the power lines under the street, that raises a lot of other questions. You know, most people's power drops are in the backyard. Now you have to get power from underground in the street back to the houses. That's a cost. But also, we're very likely to use a directional drilling method to limit the number, to limit the amount of the street we have to dig up. And that's where you put in, you know, you directionally drill a new pipe. Consumers has done this with some of their gas mains already.
Not the case on Kensington, though.
No, they have done it on some streets. They haven't done it on Kensington.
But the plan for Kensington is a big dig.
It's not.
Oh, it's not?
No. No, it's directional drilling and minimizing the amount. We're not tearing the entire street out. We're probably not tearing the entire street out for any of these projects. There will be there will be limited potholing that occurs along the street to get to the service lines to put in the new taps, but it's not a complete street dig up. And then the water mains are directionally drilled. So if you're putting the power lines in the street, it's going to be a separate process from what we're doing, because DTE would have to either then come in and open trench somewhere else, because there has to be separation between utilities. So one of the challenges is our water mains are usually on one side of the street, and then the gas main is usually on the other side of the street. So the gas main is already on the sidewalk. Usually it's under the sidewalk or under the street trees, on the other side of the street from where the water, where the fire hydrants are. So DTE would have to figure out where they're going to put their power lines underground. They'd have to figure out the method by which they're going to do that. So there's a lot of questions, and I don't know yet. I'm not saying that there aren't, but there's a lot to work through. One, they have to be interested in doing it here. And then we have to make sure that there's actual, kind of synergy, or there's a cost benefit to doing this all at once, given the various methods and locations and challenges, limitations, and everything we have going on the street. So there's a lot we have to unpack.
Well, no, and you clearly know more detail on this than I do, but the governor's letter confuses me then. Because she specifically said dig once and put the utilities in.
And if we were to dig once, then that increases the project cost, because now we're rebuilding a street in addition to replacing the water mains.
Off schedule, meaning not the schedule.
Correct, because there's really no need to dig up and replace our streets. So, the question is, yes, there's dig once, but at what point does that not make sense anymore? That's the question we have to answer and what we have to look at.
That was a big I don't know yet.
Yeah, that was a big I don't know yet.
That's true, though.
Right, and that's why, and yes, separating the water main, or separating this combined sewers.
Oh yeah, I know the implications.
There's a big issue. That's a big question too. But again, if you're asking me what makes sense for that, I mean, unfortunately, that's probably the next time the street is torn up and replaced, because that's the time you have to get down and actually do that. And so.
But if that's in 30 years, why not just do it all in 30 years?
Because 130-year-old pipes don't work as well as 100-year-old pipes.
Well, that's
don't work
true,
as well
but
as
do they work
0-year-old.
adequately is what the question is.
Yeah, I think we've decided that it's time to replace them, and now the question is the funding of the replacement. Yes, sir. Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, you haven't spoken yet, have you?
Okay. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think Charlie Kuhn, excuse me, 25 Elm Park Boulevard. I echo with George and Perry. I think it's a good idea to kind of slow down. Takes time. We have time. I don't think there's a huge rush. Let's give the CAC the time that they need to make the recommendations. I don't need to rehash what they said. I echo that. And then, Jim, you mentioned that is Kensington probably paid for by the state or not, or we don't know, or when will we know? What's the
Kensington's not
status there?
Kensington's partially funded. This year is providing half the revenue, and then next budget year we'll be providing the other half of the revenue. Right now, the revenue is tied to the usage rate.
Right. You mentioned something in the that was applied for that could potentially cover it all, unless I may have misheard you.
It would not cover it all.
Okay.
So we applied. It was $650,000. That was a strategic decision, working with Congressman Levin's office for what a realistic amount that these projects were going to get. So that would cover probably about 40% of the Kensington project.
Okay.
So at that point, that would be money that we could retain for, future projects. We could move a project up a year. We would have to decide what to do with that, with that money.
It could be socked away to give the CAC some more time too if it comes through. So I think that gives you guys some options to say, you know what, we have revenue in place, it's happening, we're not going to be behind the 8 ball. Thank you, Congressman Levin, for going to bat for us, and Jim and the rest of you guys. And now we can take the time to do this the way that I think it should be done. And I don't think it was COVID, to be honest with you. I think it was a communication thing. Talked to lots of people. It wasn't COVID. They just didn't know. So they know now. So let's allow them some time to digest and talk and get this figured out. So I'm hopeful that this comes through with Congressman Levin. I think that buys us some time. I think it's an easy decision. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Krzyjak. Familiar face.
Mayor.
As are everyone, actually.
I know. I feel like it's an old timers game around here. I mean, a lot of great old faces here. Hey, especially this guy in the corner. I just want to say congratulations, Mayor. Haven't seen you since your election. I wanted to congratulate you. Congratulate Commissioner Schmier, Commissioner Lenko. I think you guys are going to do a great job, and I really applaud you for stepping up and serving our community in that way. Definitely want to thank everybody who's served in the past. I know, a lot of us are out here tonight. We've been up there, and that's what I think the important aspect of this Citizen Advisory Commission. We'll put more of the residents in these positions, and I think that's the more we can do that, the better. So I'm in full support of the CAC as it was proposed tonight, and I really appreciate the work that this commission has done, Jim has done, to prepare for the residents to get involved. Because I believe the more residents involved, the better decision-making that we'll ultimately have. And to some of the points about duration, I actually agree that this should be a standing committee, and we should actually have participatory budgeting as part of like our regular budgetary processes. And so I love this idea. I'm very much in support of it. I'm not so envious for having to pick this, because I think it will be challenging. Like we mentioned, I think there were some good points made about anonymity and how do you get a good balance. I really appreciate the thoughtful discussion on those points. But I definitely wanted to stand up and voice my support for the CAC. There were some comments made, and there's been really great questions tonight. The one question I had sitting there was, will the elected body abide by the recommendation of the CAC? My feeling is the CAC should be given all the information. They should be given a wide berth to make their recommendations. I love the point that Mr. Ahmed had made about differing opinions. If there's a majority opinion, present that to the city commission. If there's a minority position, present that as well. But ultimately, we didn't, as the residents of this community, we didn't elect the CAC. We elected the 5 of you. So I would, my personal opinion is, you make the recommendation and you entrust the decision to the 5 of you. So, it's funny. When I was on that side, I was never nervous. No, I'm nervous. I don't get it. I think it's just like you guys are all looking at me, and it's like maybe it's a sweatshirt. I don't know.
Yeah, the mask.
Yeah, it's the mask, the sweatshirt. Yeah, exactly. Right. Nobody's smiling, nobody's frowning. They're just all looking. But I really appreciate this discussion. Like I said, I give full support to the CAC, and I just wanted to close my remarks. You know, this community lost somebody very special this week, and Jane Mikulski, when I was in that position, and I was really kind of unsure of myself, or like, what am I doing up here? Jane had really kind words for me personally, and I was always like very, very impressed to the core about the way she connected people, especially people who had differing opinions. And I would hope that in her memory, that the spirit of the CAC kind of takes that and goes forward in that spirit. And that's all I have. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason.
Yes, please.
Sorry, one more. Jeff Hand again. Since Jim opened it up, I gotta. I think you're using semantics here with the SCAF fund. SCAF fund is an asset of the city. As a result, it is part of the taxpayer's base, and to say that taxpayer dollars were not used in that manner is inaccurate. And I bring it up only in the sense that it is a potential asset that we can use to offset some of the costs, so it should be part of the consideration of the CAC. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you want to comment, Jim, or no? Okay, thank you. Anyone else this evening?
Can we call the question?
Probably need to. Great. Well, thanks everyone for your feedback this evening. I know that the process may have even seemed a little out of order, but as I'd mentioned earlier, we would typically have a workshop to go through some of these, but we thought it was important to just bring the light of day to this for everyone and let everybody see what we would normally go through, and to give everyone an opportunity to have their voice based on the motion that was available. So I think that worked out okay. And I would encourage everyone to just stay informed, and we're going to work very hard to keep everyone informed as we work through this. And with that, I think we have a call to vote.
Commissioner Lenko?
Yep.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes.
Commissioner Budnick?
Yes.
Commissioner Schmier?
Yes.
Mayor Scott?
Yes. And the motion carries. And I think that's it on the agenda. Is there anything else? Have I missed anything?
So, Commissioner, or former Commissioner Jason Krzyjak mentioned Jane Mikulski, and she is someone who has been very special to the city, and I think it's there's sort of a nice synchronicity that we're talking about her tonight, because she was the chairperson of the last CAC, and she did a beautiful job of being engaged and really trying to give direction. You're never going to have everybody happy in a situation like that, but she definitely led it, I think, with the grace and wisdom that she always led everything. But I think one of the things that she, if you look at, all the things that have been written about her, you'll see how amazing she is. But the thing I think that is most important about her that I hope we all carry forward is what an amazing neighbor she was, and how, like Jason said, how she connected people. And it's like, it was incredible, like this connection she had on her street on Elm Park, and beyond that. And I think I hope we all like just celebrate her spirit and help reach out to some of the kids and some of your other neighbors, and just, we all help, we just carry on the spirit of Jane, and making, your street, your bigger community just, more connected. And because we are all in this together. And while we have some differences of opinions as, on this whole matter, I think, and on many different things, I think we have to remember we are all in this together and we are a good community, and trying to remember that, everyone's trying their best and has, let's all be Jane.
Yeah, she
Thank
was
you.
certainly one of the first folks that I met when I moved into town almost 10 years ago, actually a little over 10 years ago. She was full of wisdom. She always had good advice. I can't think of anything that she said that, that was just misguiding or anything. She was a really good person. So I will miss her, and I know a lot of you will miss her too.
Authentic and electric smile.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right, with that, I think I'll need a motion to adjourn. Sorry.
Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Awesome. That's it, folks. Thank you.
Good job.
Wow.